usually this blunt. They're usually very dry and the language is very elliptical. They don't usually sound like this. Quote, "The evidence in the record demonstrates that proponents of the bill were motivated at the very least in part because of and not in spite of the law's detrimental effects on the African American and Hispanic electorate." Quote, "The record as a whole, including the legislators' knowledge that the bill would clearly impact minorities disproportionately and likely disenfranchise them, the record as a whole shows that the bill was racially motivated." The bill was racially motivated, full stop. It's not usually that blunt. But it sort of had to be, given what Texas did. After the voting rights was gutted by the conservative majority on the Supreme Court, Texas put in place a new voting restriction in that state. And the legislature knew that new law would disproportionately keep Black and Hispanic Texans from voting. Black and Hispanic Texans who were legally able to vote, but they wouldn't be able to anymore because of these new restrictions that the legislature was putting in place. And the legislature knew that when they were putting the new law in place. And a federal judge in Texas nailed them for that. Did an absolutely comprehensive review of the creation of that law and the testimony that legislators heard and what they studied and what they knew before they passed that law. And going through that legislative record, the trial judge in Texas, federal judge, absolutely nailed them for how deliberately racist that voter ID law was. This was the strictest voter ID law in the country. And the federal Justice Department sued Texas to stop it. And the judge in that case found in favor of the Justice Department, found against the state of Texas in this blistering, blunt, comprehensive ruling that said, yeah, when the legislature passed this law, it was deliberately designed to keep minorities from being able to vote, even though they were legally entitled to vote. And then after that ruling, two other three-judge panels, 6 more judges, also found the law to be unconstitutional. And then this past summer, the most conservative appeals court in the country also found that the law had a discriminatory effect. But the court said that they weren't convinced necessarily that the lawmakers had discriminatory intent, that they meant it to be discriminatory, even though it definitely was. So that part of it, they sent it back to the original judge who had written that blistering opinion condemning the law as racially motivated. And lawyers from the Justice Department, lawyers from the Voting Rights Division of the Justice Department, were due back in that judge's courtroom on Tuesday, this upcoming Tuesday, to make their case again. They were due back on Tuesday. Now they're not going to be there on Tuesday. As of 12:01 p.m. today, the Justice Department is run by a new administration. And the new administration, for all of its disorganization and failure to staff key government posts, they made clear today that they've got a few priorities they're going to be jumping on immediately. Or I guess actually they made clear that they've got this one substantive priority that they're going to jump on immediately. They did not announce anything about it. But this is one of the very few things they actually did today on day one. They filed a motion in Texas asking to postpone that hearing on Tuesday in this voting rights case. They asked that the hearing be put off, quote, because of the federal government's change in administration, which took place on January 20th, 2017. Because of the change in administration, the Department of Justice also experienced a transition in leadership. And new leadership in this case maybe means that Texas is going to be okay with its voter ID law that all courts agree is racially discriminatory. Tonight, the Texas court granted the new request from the new Justice Department. That hearing will be delayed by more than a month now, by which time, presumably, Jeff Sessions will be running the Justice Department as Attorney General. What do you think the Jeff Sessions Justice Department is going to say when it gets back in that courtroom in Texas? Think the U.S. Justice Department will still be on the side of the plaintiffs, arguing that Texas's voter ID law is intentionally discriminatory and it should be struck down? Do you think the Trump Justice Department will continue to push the case of Black and Hispanic voters in Texas who have been disenfranchised by this law? We'll see, but here's a clue. It has been reported in the last 24 hours that President Trump's pick to head the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division is a man named John Gore. We don't have official confirmation of this from the Trump administration, but we know who John Gore is. And we know that last week he withdrew as the lawyer who was in charge of defending the North Carolina bathroom bill, the anti-trans bathroom bill. He withdrew from that case because he said he would, quote, imminently be departing from his law firm and thus will no longer be able to represent the defendants. And the other thing we know about John Gore is that when he's not defending anti-LGBT discrimination bills, his real expertise is defending electoral redistricting plans against claims of civil rights violations. And that apparently is going to be the guy in charge of civil rights in the Trump administration. That reportedly is their pick to head up the Civil Rights Division in the Department of Justice. You can tell a lot about a new administration's priorities by what they do on their first day. In this case, they promised the moon and the stars and they'd be building the wall. What they did was put the brakes on a voting rights case. That was pretty much Act 1.